Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey everyone, it's me, Jackie.
Hello, it's me, Diana.
Oh boy, guys. Well, we've been doing this behavior analysis, behavior analytic research podcast for many years now. I think at this point, we've probably trained, whether between us and certainly all of the amazing researchers and professors and supervisors out there, we've done our small part. I think we did it, guys. I think all the behavior analysts know all the behavior analysis. We said, that's enough. We got to branch out. It's time to start bringing behavior analysis to some of the corners of the world where we have some amazing professionals. We have a lot of professionals out there. We behavior analysts, I know we have a rap of, just thinking about ourselves all the time, but we love all these other professionals. We love working and collaborating. And we said, what if we bring some behavior analysis to them? And we were talking about it. We thought, okay, what are we going to do? How do we do this as an episode? And we got stumped, but we were very lucky. We just turned on the recording machine, and lo and behold, who should appear but Dr. Dorothea Lerman, who has written extensively on the subject and said, I guess I've got some time. I don't know how I got here, but I would love to talk about...
It's really fortuitous.
We get lucky sometimes. It just happens. It's some podcast magic. To talk all about how we can train other professionals outside of our field. So without any further ado, Dr. Dorothea Lerman, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So we are going to be talking tonight all about some research that Dorothy and colleagues have done on training other professionals. And we say professionals because we've certainly done a lot of topics on training other BCBAs, training parents, training certain teachers. Mm-hmm. But we're going outside of the realm of those folks that you probably think of when you hear the word training and behavior analyst training. We're going to be talking about law enforcement officers, and we're going to be talking about dentists and how we as BCBAs can support training or work in including other individuals in improving their ability to work with autistic individuals or individuals with other disabilities. So it's a very exciting topic. But before we get into that, Dorothy, please tell us about yourself and how you came to be working on this subject.
So I am currently a professor of behavior analysis at the University of Houston Clear Lake, where I direct a master's program in behavior analysis, and I also direct our Center for Autism and Developmental Disabilities. I've been at UHCL since 2004. Prior to that, I was at Louisiana State University, faculty in the school psychology program. And actually, what brought me here was my husband. So he's an astrophysicist, and he was working for NASA. And I was very fortunate that UHCL was looking to start a behavior analysis program. And it's been a lot of fun.
Okay, so professor of psychology, behavior analysis, and an astrophysicist. So is everyone around you jealous? Okay, that's the smartest house in the neighborhood. Okay,
well,
everybody.
I have to tell you, whenever I go anywhere with him, if I'm among behavior analysts, they all want to just talk to him.
Oh, no. Well, but when you're with the astrophysicists, are they like, yeah, space, whatever. What's happening here on Earth? Tell us about the work you're doing.
No, unfortunately not.
So we're going to have the How to Talk to Astrophysicists research. That's coming later. How can we collaborate more in that department? Perhaps another time. Okay.
We didn't invite him. We brought you.
I know. I feel very, very fortunate. But you didn't know I was married to an astrophysicist or rocket scientist. So.
Right. I didn't know.
But, behavior analysts, as you know, have a very, very long history of training others to implement our technologies. And from the very inception of the field, we were training caregivers and parents and teachers to implement behavior analytic procedures. And that made a lot of sense because our focus on environmental variables suggests that everyone, in all of the person's environment needs to be on the same page and implementing similar procedures to maintain behavior change. But what I really got interested in was training professionals not to serve as mediators of our interventions, but to incorporate some of our procedures so that they can be more effective at what they do.
Right.
Mhm.
And, to be honest, it really got started. I have a long history of training teachers, but it had not gone beyond that until one of my graduate students, Carly Hinkle, her very first year in the program, she came to me. She had read this article about a young man, a young teen with autism who was in a park and he was minding his own business. He was playing with some string. And, obviously maybe he was talking to himself. And so someone called the police.
Mm.
And the police got there and his body cam was going. So it's all on tape. And literally within 5 minutes of him approaching this young teen, the teen was on the ground with bruises, an injured leg.
Oh my
And as Carly was telling me this story, she had tears in her eyes. And she said that she wanted to make it one of her missions was so that this didn't happen to anybody else. Because what happened was the police officer just rushed in, made assumptions that he was on drugs, and immediately escalated the situation. And with just even a little bit of noncompliance or resistance from this young man, he immediately had him restrained on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really began our interest in this area.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it must have been so frightening for him and for parents. I've had many parents express their concern over this exact scenario happening.
Mm-hmm.
As we started to dig into the literature, so I said, so Carly said she wanted to do her research, her master's thesis research on this area. And so she started digging into the research and she was just alarmed. She was uncovering a lot of research showing that this is a big problem. Very high percentage of individuals with autism get stopped by police. Yeah. And of course, some of the police interactions are the result of someone calling for help because the individual is engaging in some disruptive behavior. But even in those cases, up to a third of parents have reported that the police just make the situation worse. Mm-hmm. But what was even more alarming was there was very little research on effective training programs. All of them relied on didactic instruction, measuring things like knowledge rather than actual behavior. And even those were not effective. So even the things that they were just telling you stuff about autism, and then they would take a post-test. Even those, the authors were saying, well, the post-test increases weren't great, So we saw that there was a clear need to do some work in this area.
Well, that's, what a good use of graduate time to say, here's an important issue. Let's do a little bit of research on that. That's excellent. I hope many people can have that, a similar story in terms of something important, going to do some research on it.
How did you come to do the dental work? Not your dental work, but like the work that I almost said that. I was like, that sounded.
Yes. So that was actually them coming to us. So there is in Houston at Baylor College of Medicine, they have a very unique clinic it's one of the few in the country it's called the Transition Clinic. And it's specifically for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's an interdisciplinary clinic that serves as a medical home for those individuals.
Okay.
And they don't have a dental clinic, but interestingly enough, they had gotten a grant to work with some of their, obviously their patients many of their patients, they had learned did have trouble tolerating dental exams. And in fact, many of them were either sedated or restrained for even just simple cleanings, which is very dangerous, right? And so they partnered with a dental school, and they wanted to not only treat patients who were very anxious and uncooperative during dental exams, they wanted to develop a curriculum for the dental students. And so they had heard from someone that, we had a behavior analysis program, and they knew they wanted a behavior analyst. So they reached out to us, and it was great timing because I had a staff person on another grant. Her name is Lucia Salmi, a BCBA, very talented. And that grant was ending, and she was looking for a new challenge. And so that was about a year before the pandemic. So obviously some things changed during the pandemic.
Like,
but that's how that got started is they came to us.
Oh, wow. So for folks listening, let's give the citations for the two papers that we'll be discussing.
My gosh. We just jumped right in, and that's my role.
That's Diana, you're asleep at the job.
I don't know what's going on. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so we have two articles that we're going to review today. The first is titled, Preparing Law Enforcement Officers to Engage Successfully with Individuals with Autism Spectrum Disorder, an Evaluation of a Performance-Based Approach. That's by Hinkle and Lerman, published in Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, 2021. And then we will also talk about remote training of dental students and professionals to promote cooperative behavior in patients with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That's by Mariucci, Lerman, Sami, and Boyle. And that was in the Journal of Developmental and Physical Disabilities, 2022.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. So we talked a little bit about some of the research that had been, that your students were, digging up, and then you were digging up when sort of looking into, are these sort of isolated incidents or isolated problems, or are these pretty common problems? And I think, looking at the introductions to the papers, when we're talking about professions that are helper professions, it certainly doesn't sound like things are going the way anyone would like them to in terms of the ability for both, either dentists or law enforcement officers to support individuals with autism or individuals with disabilities. I know you mentioned a few of the statistics on that, Dorothy. Were there any other kind of surveys or other research on these areas that you hadn't mentioned that are worth kind of bringing up before we get started?
Well, it's actually kind of alarming. So we've actually started. We've done the one with dental students and professionals, and now we've moved on. And I'll tell you a little bit later if we have time. Medical students and professionals, because the information is actually pretty alarming on the amount of training and or exposure that dental students, medical students get on treating individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities. Like for medical students, an organization did a study, and they said it averaged out to 11 minutes of didactic instruction for their entire. And so what's happening is either because they don't feel like they got adequate preparation, or because when they do take patients with IDD or autism and there's some issues, they just flat out either won't take them anymore, or they insist that they have to be sedated or restrained for really just routine procedures. And what was really fascinating for us is, so we started working with the transition clinic, as I mentioned, and Lucia Salmi started to see patients. And we had a baseline that we thought initially we thought of it as a baseline, right? So, but it was really just a set of basic procedures that really any dentist should be doing, like saying hello when the first person first comes in and sits down, and, telling them what they're about to do before they do it, and, praising them for tolerating steps. And we thought that was going to be our baseline, right? That we were going to see some problems, and then we would start to look at more intervention. 50% of our participants were fine in baseline. 50%. And these were people that either hadn't been to the dentist in years because of problems, or the dentist said, we cannot see your child unless, and of course, these are all adults, though, unless they're sedated or restrained.
Wow.
So that was such an eye-opener for us, because that showed that there's a lot of unnecessary sedation and restraint going on, particularly in the dental world, And we'll see now that we're going to start working in the more the medical physical exam world. But that was such an eye-opener for us that we immediately, even though we hadn't finished the study, we immediately decided to put out preliminary results where we had about 20 patients completed. But we've continued, obviously, and added more participants. And at 50% is still about the percentage we're getting of individuals who are fine with what we call just best practice baseline that any dentist should be doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so in some of those situations, I mean, whether it's the police officers or whether it's the dental students or the dentists, did you get a sense from, talking with them or talking with sort of the trainers? Was it just a matter of it's just too small a percentage of the clientele? Was it some sort of a fear? Was it a confusion? Was it hey, there's the lack of resources? I mean, did you have a sense of sort of a common core as to why some of these basic practices just sort of weren't a bigger part of the curriculum or weren't a part of what was going to be trained later on or practiced later on?
That's a great question. In terms of the police officers, what we did is, so when we approached the largest police department in our area, which is the Houston Police Department, they wanted us to be embedded within, they have a mental health training program, and it's all the cadets have to take a week of this training. And at that time, I think they had been wanting to include autism, but maybe the trainers just didn't feel like they had the expertise. Mm-hmm. So they hadn't yet done that. And so when Carly approached them about doing research, they said, well, and this was really smart of them. They said, well, we really need to get to know you. The police really need to get to know you. You need to learn more about us. So why don't you intern for a year and you can create a training program for us for that 1 week mental health week. So fortunately, Carly had time, or it's a 3 years master's program, and she was just in her first year. But that was such a smart thing because she learned a lot. So she trained, many cadets before she ever did her research.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And really, I think everyone really appreciated it. I think it wasn't that they thought there wasn't that many out there or they wouldn't be interacting with them, certainly the police. And in terms of the dentists, again, I do think that they see that it's important. And in fact, both the American Dental Association and the American Medical Association over and over have said this type of training is important and have mandated it needs to be included in the curriculum. I think what they're struggling with is fitting it into their existing curriculum.
Mm-hmm. Fitting it in and finding people to train it. We also have a dental clinic that is associated with Regis, and our dental clinic has reached out to the ABA department as well and saying like, hey, let's do something. Here's the short period of time that we have, right? And so we're trying to work with that, but I think it's challenging too because they don't know themselves. They didn't receive that training. And so they're finding it difficult to find the people that can.
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head is they have to find people with the expertise. And the other issue is they're so used to doing didactic trainings. Mm-hmm. They call in a behavior analyst. The behavior analyst is going to say that isn't going to work.
Yeah.
But so, for example, I have to, in full disclosure, we got a grant to train medical students. We just got it. It just started. And on our first year, we had to agree to train 200 medical students, and they're giving us 60 minutes.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
So I understand that that's not ideal, but it's our foot in the door, right? Mm-hmm. It's our foot in the door. And what we're going to do is we're going to take those 200 people and we're going to break them into groups of 10, and we're going to try to do at least a few role plays.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And not to jump ahead.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We're hoping to recruit some of them who might be interested in a little bit more intensive training. But that's the thing is you've got to really work it and to really disseminate this stuff to professionals. You've got to figure out how to fit your stuff in and make it work. You can't be very rigid or inflexible. You can't say it's got to be this way or forget it. I'm not providing that training. And that's something we really learned with the police officers is that's basically what they were giving Carly was just a very short period of time. And so when she did the role plays, everyone just did took one turn. But if it wasn't your turn, you were watching. And what we were hoping was watching your fellow cadets would be additional training for you. And in fact, her data suggested that it was adequate, at least immediately after, they could then implement that and it was, of course, all in simulation, but they could implement it with very high integrity.
Creating the procedures, whether it was, for the dental students or for the police officers, it does seem like a lot of the skills you'd want to teach in both those settings. Well, there's been other research about it, but it's always been done by who's done it? Well, the BCBAs have done it. They've done it as part of their research. They've done it in their very specific clinic. So when it came time to train the other groups, you've already mentioned some of the challenges, or not even challenges, actually, some of the reality that needed to be taken into account. Were there other situations that sort of dictated this is how this study is going to go, this is how this training is going to go when you came into both settings? Was it a matter of it was always time? It was, I know COVID coming in sort of changed some of the tactics that were probably going to be used with the dental students. What was that process like across these settings? Because I know I read the first half and I was like, at the end they're going to say, and we couldn't do the research. It was too hard. People wouldn't do our gold standard behavior skills training, and we took our ball and we went home, and it's story over, right?
They're lost.
I love this question. So the thing about it is in terms of, we generally are, very focused on how to teach, right? But you've really got to be mindful about what you're teaching. And you've got to make sure that what you are teaching fits in with what they're doing already. So that was another really important reason why it was helpful for Carly to have that 1-year internship. So right from the beginning, they told her that if there was any dangerous behavior, they had to use their own procedures. They couldn't use what Carly was going to train them. And we realized that actually wasn't the problem, though. The problem was that police officers weren't discriminating between dangerous behavior and just problematic behavior. And that they were just rushing in and escalating. So if you look at the steps we taught the police officers, really the whole goal was to slow them down. So, we taught them to first, of course, stand back. If there's problematic behavior, they needed to just stand there and wait till it goes. They're calm for at least a minute. Then start to build rapport by asking questions about, fun questions, not like, what's your name? Who are you? Why are you here? But, look at that shirt. Do you like Mickey Mouse? Or, looking at things to talk about that they might enjoy talking about. And then ask a question and rephrase it at least 3 times. And then if they don't answer, give a request that would require a motor response. And, we described it to them as a way to gain compliance, because it was when the individuals were not following instructions that the police officers generally would escalate things and use that as a reason for rushing in a bit more. But really what we wanted to do was teach them a bunch of steps to follow that would have the result of just slowing them down. And so that really was what we were going for. But we had to make sure that what we were training was not going to conflict with things they were already learning. And quite honestly, when we decided on what we were going to train them, we were like, they should do this with everyone, not just people they think have autism, right?
That's what I was just thinking. It's not like you actually know someone's diagnosis when you meet them on the street and you're there to assess the situation.
Of course, we described the characteristics of autism and we told them what to look for, but we don't expect them to be able to identify someone with autism. And we quite frankly don't think that's important.
Right.
We want them to think anyone that they approach who's acting a little atypical could potentially have autism. And so, and maybe they don't. Maybe they have schizophrenia or Alzheimer's or something else. But we thought this was good to teach them regardless. And then for the dentists, the thing about dentists and physicians is they don't have a whole lot of time to spend with each patient.
Right.
And what we wanted to do was come up with a package of procedures that would be practical to implement within the context of an exam.
Mhm.
And so that's how we came up with those procedures. And you'll notice that we included something called tell, show, do.
Mm-hmm.
We included that because that is what dentists are taught, right? That is the one thing they learn in dental school about behavior management is to do tell, show, do. So we thought, okay, we got to include that in there, right?
I see them do it with my kids. Yes.
Yeah.
See, did any of the students, when you did tell, show, do, say, "Oh, I've never heard of this before"? And you're like, gotcha. I know you're supposed to have learned that one already.
I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, their baselines weren't great, right? So clearly, there was an issue. Now, you mentioned COVID, and I've got just a really interesting story about Carly's study. So she, for the second part of this study where she was training those large groups of cadets, she actually was doing it with 2 classes. And the Friday of the last class, where she was going to get her post-training probes, at midnight, they were shutting the city of Houston down.
No,
March
that's
13th,
the worst.
2020, Friday the 13th.
She got in there, and she got her data. And I was like calling her on the phone, "Did you get your data? Did you get your data?"
Oh my goodness.
It was crazy. It was so crazy. And then, of
for
course,
her.
by the time we did the dental study, we actually implemented it. We were full force in COVID shutdown.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, she pivoted to do it. I mean, then we thought, well, you know what? Studying this virtually that's going to increase accessibility to the experts.
Yeah,
so let's just turn this into a telehealth study, a telehealth training study.
Right.
And unfortunately, we couldn't do it with actual patients. Only one person could. Yeah. But what we did is have them identify someone in their home, so someone in their social bubble, who they could then do it in person so that we could evaluate whether virtual role play would generalize to in-person role play is basically what we ended up doing.
That was so smart. That was such an ingenious way around the issue because, Jackie and I, our students too, we all had to pivot everyone's studies to being remote and trying to work around those challenges. And that was just so smart of you guys.
We actually had 2 dental studies that were supposed to be going during COVID, and they got shut down, and we couldn't do them because our IRB said no. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. It was like a dental desense safely. Right?
Well, I'll tell you what we did. So Marissa's study was where she worked with the dental students in on telehealth, but we still had Lucia, who was working directly with the patients. Remember, I said 50% of them were fine so she pivoted to telehealth, and it became a parent implemented procedure. And so what we did was, once it was safe to go back for some portion of patients, what she did and what she's continuing to do, we're wrapping that study up, is she's evaluating whether treatment effects with the parent in the home generalize with a dentist in the dental office. Smart. And we're getting really good results with that. I never thought we would, because it's a parent, right? It's in their home. Why, you wouldn't think it generalized to a dental office, but we're getting really good results with that.
I wish we would have talked to you like 2 years ago.
Jackie, that's all Diana's been saying while we were reviewing notes. He's like, I'm so frustrated. It's going to be such a good study. We're going to learn so much.
We're redoing them now. We're starting them now. So in 5 years, maybe you'll see some results.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
Hey, everybody. Sorry to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but I wanted to remind you all that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. You are able to earn CEs, 1 learning CE for listening to this show. All you need to do is finish listening and then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, and click on the Get CEUs button, or you can click the link in your podcast player show note description. Once you're there, enter in the 2 secret code words. I'm not going to give you both now, just one. And these are special guest code words. The first one is Galileo. Galileo, Galileo, which is from our special guest, Dr. Lerman. Whether you're thinking of the fancy old-timey scientist Galileo or thinking of something else, that is your code word. Galileo. All right, now back to our discussion. Dorothy, I know one of the things that I thought was very interesting was certainly because of some of the, some of the limitations, the health limitations of the shutdowns and everything, was trying to accomplish role play situations in either the training situation, the training groups with the law enforcement officers, or kind of the virtual telehealth ones where you sort of had the research assistant sort of acting out over the camera, sort of what they would be doing as the patient. And I always am curious when there's ever a role play, like, did you direct folks? Was there a script they were expected to follow? I mean, I know there was sort of the categories of, you have the non-compliant individual, you have the individual who's escalated, who's a little escalated, who escalates during. So I know you had those kind of categories, but sort of what was the process of preparing folks for role play? Because I know when I do role play with, the staff I work with in schools, it kind of goes hit or miss. I always get a lot of accolades for my amazing acting ability, but usually people just start laughing because it's like, oh, it's so good. Wow, how'd you do? And then it misses the point of like, no, I'm not trying. I don't need applause, folks. I need you to do the skill I just taught you. So I was curious kind of what that process was like for you. I'm getting a face over your listeners from Diana here.
We write out very detailed scripts. So we give the people who are doing who are acting as either the patient or the individual with autism, they are following very, very detailed scripts so that we can just make sure that we do everything that we're trying to accomplish there. Mm-hmm. And we want, each data point, each session needs to be comparable to the previous one. And so, it needs to be very carefully scripted.
Was there any thought to using autistic actors? Because I think even some of the police officers and some of the surveys were saying it would have been great if we could have included, and I know we're almost at the shutdown. So again, not that'd be one more logistical barrier to go through is like auditioning folks. But was that ever a part of the plan, or like, maybe for the future?
I'd love to do that. I definitely would love to do that in the future. It wasn't part of our initial plan because we just had never done this before. Mm-hmm. And so we just felt like we needed to start with actors, right? But I definitely would love to do that in the future. There's so many things I would like to do in the future. Another is, we never got input. So in coming up with those procedures for the police and in coming up with the interventions we are teaching the dental students, the medical students to do, we haven't gotten input from caregivers, from people with autism, and we're rectifying that. So with our most recent grant, we included an advisory panel. And so we have an advisory panel that includes not only caregivers, other types of professionals, but also several self-advocates too. So people with autism.
That's
so
excellent.
We're hoping to inform what we're doing that way. But I would love to I think it'd be a little bit challenging because the role plays that we were doing with the police officers is we were purposefully including people who were not vocal verbal or had very minimal verbal skills. And so to get those individuals, although I guess we could still use someone with autism who's acting, who has good receptive or expressive language skills, but is acting as though they don't. So I would definitely love to do that in the future.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you have, developed more of a group to sort of help continue to iterate on the process. So it would be something to discuss. I wouldn't want to go through the process of trying to hire an actor to begin with. That just feels like regardless, like, oh, yeah, you gotta go.
Rob doesn't need
agent.
One. He's just amazing.
I just, call my agent, folks, if you need some role plays.
It turns out, I didn't know this, but medical schools do use simulated patients, and they pay them, and they have them on, basically on staff. Or I don't know if they work full time for the medical schools, but they regularly, that's their job, is they are simulated patients. And so we would love to work with, so we're working with a couple of medical schools for our newest grant. And that is one thing that we're going to ask them about, is if we could get a simulated patient that has autism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Can I ask you a question about
to be a simulated patient?
Patient act. Did you ever see that episode of Seinfeld, Jackie, where Kramer
I don't watch TV. You forgot. I know nothing.
That's an old show. Seinfeld is an old show.
TV's
Kramer gets to be a simulated patient. It's a very funny episode. Look, I'm sure it's on YouTube. You can look it up after.
I had forgotten about that episode, but now that you mentioned it, I remember that.
Yeah. He gets there. He's like,
I'll have to dig that out.
It was a dark and stormy night. It's got this whole, it's like a one-man show. And then at the end, the doctors are like, oh, it's, syphilis or something like that. They're like, oh, plotting.
Amazing. Well, I had a question about the role plays too, if that's okay, because I feel like, I know there are many critical components of BST, but it's hard to argue that the role play is not one of the most critical components. And I think when you're trying to run a BST, it is the piece that people are most reluctant to do. Mm-hmm. But then again, when you look at the social validity that came out of those studies, everyone really valued the role play a lot. But do you know if it was challenging to get folks to initially participate in those role plays? I feel like there's a lot of reluctance often.
Well, the cadets know, because they actually, the cadet training that they do actually incorporate some role plays. Now, it's not like our role plays. So the thing that bugged Carly was that it wasn't like they were taught exactly what to do. It was kind of fuzzy. So at least the cadets were used to that. They knew that it was something that they should do. Police do a lot of simulation type trainings. And so they didn't have a problem with that. And what was actually kind of interesting is when she ran the baselines with the cadets, she, for whatever reason, she decided to have the actor on the floor throwing a tantrum. And many of the cadets, the first thing they did is they came rushing in, got down on the floor with them. and the mental health trainers were just like, that's like the exact opposite. That's still unsafe for everyone.
Yeah,
right?
They're in a vulnerable position. Yeah.
So clearly they hadn't done enough role plays to show that these cadets were going to be doing things that are really, not appropriate. So like I said, the cadets really did not seem to have an issue with it. I think the dental students, particularly because it was through the computer and then they were doing it with a friend or a family member, I think that some of them probably felt uncomfortable. They did it. They signed up for the study. They were volunteers. So they knew they were going to have to do that. They had to recruit someone to role play with. So they knew it was part of it. So it's a little self-selected since it's volunteers. But what I forgot to mention is for their partner, their family member or friend, they had a bug in the ear and we were telling them what to do.
Fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So they probably enjoyed it.
Spy level stuff.
So there's a little bit of awkwardness. And,
Yeah.
quite frankly, I've trained teachers for years, and they're the ones that really don't like the role play. A lot of them don't like the role play. It's very awkward for them. They love it if we bring in a real student, a real kid for them to work with. They're totally all over it. They love it. They love to get feedback on that. It's the role play they feel real awkward. Yeah.
Yeah. It is strange. I think sometimes it might be the age too with the teachers. It's like, I'm 5. Look at me. And it's like, you're clearly not 5.
Right.
Like, this is awkward. We're all embarrassed now.
Right.
At least with the police, it's like, no, you will see adults. It's mostly who you will encounter.
That's true. Yeah.
So we sort of mentioned a lot of the components of the training procedures, but I'd love to talk a little bit more, Dorothy, about how sort of the standard BST protocol that we all know and love was sort of shifted or in some cases truncated, to fit the mold that it needed to be in. So in terms of the law enforcement officers, I know that the big change was not everyone was going to practice all of the scenarios, right? That was kind of one of the big changes.
So that was a 2-part study. The first part we did as just a more of a traditional BST training that we're used to doing as behavior analysts, because we just wanted to get all our ducks in a row. We had never done this before. And so we recruited, they were actually police officers that were associated with educational institutions, so universities and high school. And so, we did sort of the traditional BST with them. But we realized very quickly that wasn't going to work to train a bunch of people, right? So the way we modified that was we created basically a text prompt for the cadets that we envisioned that they could be something that's in their pocket. And they, if they come on a call, they can, and they think that they might need to use these and they can't remember, they can pull out that card and refer to it. And that was very helpful. So we gave the cadets that, so they had that. And so that was a big modification to improve upon doing that individual one-on-one BST that we did in the first experiment. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, everyone was going to get one practice and then they had to do it, right? Mm-hmm. They had to show us that they could do it. Mm-hmm. And for the dental training, that was more traditional. What made it different was it was a virtual role play. Mm-hmm. But, each person practiced until they met a mastery criterion, and then the other person went. It was just in groups of 2. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't large group, 2 or 3. And it wasn't large groups because we weren't really focused on the large group. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, we initially conceptualized it and proposed it as a larger group, but trying to juggle the schedules of dental students so that 5 or 6 of them could show up at the same time was not going to happen. It just, we couldn't make it work. Yeah. And so we focused less on it in a group format and more the fact that it was a virtual format.
When I was reading the dentist study too, the text prompt would be really helpful for the dentists as well, I think.
Yes, it would. Now they did actually have materials so that they could refer to at any time. They had not only the task analysis of the dental exam, but they had the handouts about the procedures that they could have referred to. And what we also did was we made a little training video that we encouraged them to review right before they used it with a patient. Once they were going to be working with patients, we encouraged them to have it available. They could review it at any time. And that's the other thing we sort of envision is a dentist is going to know ahead of time. A police officer may not know ahead of time that they're going to encounter someone with autism, but certainly a dentist will. And so there's no reason why they couldn't pull up a 10-minute video and refresh themselves on what to do. And so we kind of envision that for both dentists and medical professionals, other healthcare professionals. And so we've replicated the dental study with medical students. And that was just as we were coming out of COVID. So about half of the medical students, we did get probes with actual patients, and it was looking really good.
I love these suggestions for modifications for BST because we know that BST works really well. But traditional BST, and even when you try to add in like train the trainer, pyramidal BST model, it's effective, but it's really resource intensive and resource heavy. So any ways that you can go about making it less resource intensive is going to end up being really beneficial for the groups that you're attempting to serve.
So with our newest grant, one thing we've decided we're going to study is how many role plays do you need? So we're going to directly manipulate the number of role plays that the medical student does before we test them to kind of get at that. I think we really lucked out with the police officers that for the most part, just one role play was enough. And then they watched other people. But, we didn't, that study is so limited because we didn't look at their performance after, like when they're out in the field, right? With real people in real situations. But we did get some exciting news. Several months after she finished her study, they called us and they actually even wrote an article it was sort of, the Houston Police Department have sort of an internal magazine that they share with their employees, news.
Oh, wow.
And one of it was that these cops went out on a call, and because someone was talking about there was a disturbance, someone was disturbing, and they literally had their guns. They were starting to draw their guns. And one of them said, "Wait a minute, I think he might have autism." And he was someone who had been in Carly's training.
Oh,
wow.
But they in their magazine, in their article they actually attributed this to Carly's training, that they immediately stood down, they put their guns away, they backed off, and it was just wonderful to hear that.
wow.
That's a cry jerker. That's like a tearjerker, not a cry jerker. That's a tearjerker right there.
Yeah.
So, certainly that's a positive.
We need more of that
in terms of the potential utility of specifically the training that had been put in play. Was there any more? I think we kind of mentioned a few things that you mentioned in the study in terms of the kind of the social validity surveys after. But were there any sort of other themes that were sort of either positive or that led you to think of how to do the study differently in the future?
Well, like I said, half of the cadets we didn't give the role play to. And their feedback was, they really would have liked hands-on. So clearly they understood the need for that. And so that's something that's really positive. Yeah.
That is good. Yeah, I love how it was phrased too in the article in terms of here was some of the I think you mentioned some of the themes and the idea of like we needed role plays, and then you had to mention after that, and that was the group that didn't get the role plays, because it was, if I was reading, I was like, there's the dichotomy here is all over the place in terms of the thing they're demanding these things that clearly are in the procedures, and then. But that was the group that was, that was the control. They didn't get all this good stuff. They just got the didactic piece.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the dental and medical students, because like I said, we've replicated, we're close to submitting the second paper, is some of them on the social validity survey in terms of the procedures we're teaching them. Like I said, we tried to come up with a package we thought would be practical within the context of a routine dental exam or medical exam. But some of them still said they felt like it might be difficult to do it because for the dental exams, they were building in lots of non-contingent breaks and things. So that's something that we might think about. Do we really need the whole package? Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's something that we plan to look at. Because I have a confession. So the package that we've put together to train the medical students, we've actually never tested it on the kids themselves. So we assume it's going to be effective, at least for a portion of patients based on the research out there. Yeah. But it's a specific package that we haven't tested, that no one's actually tested this particular package because it's also without extinction. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we're going to be doing. We're starting that up shortly here is we're going to actually look and see. We don't expect it to be effective with everybody. Right. But the goal is as long as it's effective with at least a portion of their patients, then that's a great thing, right? And then the rest can be referred for more intensive treatment. But at least the dental professionals, the medical professionals, they themselves could at least handle and be successful with a portion. So that's something that we're going to find out for our medical package, the package we're going to train medical students, how many individuals who already have a history of difficulty tolerating exams will this be successful with. So it's a little embarrassing we hadn't done that. So we're trying to remedy that situation.
I mean, it's good that you're asking the questions and then exploring the answers, because the alternative is this sort of all or nothing that I think some of this research started with. Either nobody knows what they're doing about, in these certain situations, and they just are going to be hands off, or in the case of the police, very hands on, or you can demand, here are the things we can do. And then the only time, individuals can get those services are if you have a dentist or a police officer who sort of has a BCBA partner who knows what to do and they're working together, which always seemed like, I know I heard of dentists that sort of have, that's their business model, is you can come in and you can have all the time you want, but those tend to be dentists who are going to be more like private pay dentists because it takes a long time. And then that's going to be very limiting to only.
Well, they have a history of working with this population, I think, and they see the need.
Yeah, I do agree that there are, and I should have mentioned that I am aware of some dentists who specialize in people with developmental disabilities, but there's very few of them. And there's a ton of patients. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. What I really and truly love about this is that we're not just looking at on the client end, right? Like what can we do to help them change their behavior in the dental setting, right? Or if they're having a hard time, but it's how can we change everybody else's behavior so that we're creating systems that are going to be, like you said, like best practice approaches, right? So this is what we teach everyone as the best practice, antecedent situation to create so that people can then come into it and have success, because everybody has stuff to learn in this situation. And we shouldn't only put it on the client.
Oh, that is so true. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's the biggest thing that I think is why it's so important for us to be working with non-behavioral professionals, right? They're the ones that really need to be changing their behavior, right? To make those accommodations. And that's the complaint you hear over and over again from families of individuals with developmental disabilities, is that dentists, mental health care providers don't seem willing to make those accommodations. I think it's because they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so,
and maybe a little bit fearful, right? Because they don't know what to do, so they're not sure what's going to happen. So that's easier to not do it.
Yeah.
Than to do it.
Well, Dorothy, I think, unless you had any more, because I think these were great in terms of time capsule research. They sort of both happened at very interesting historical times. Did you have any other fun anecdotes about the development or change in research? Because I think these, more than some of the papers, like you could even see it in the papers of, here's the plan and here's how it had to go awry because of totally unrelated to research issues. Were there any other kind of fun stories like that? Because I always love hearing those with research, because you just never get them. You never get them in the paper. There's not enough space.
Right. No, I agree. I'm trying to think. I think I may have told you all of the little extra things that didn't make it into the papers.
You gave us some good tidbits.
I know. I appreciate that. That's my favorite part of talking about research, is like, what are the random things that happened that had nothing to do with the results? It had more to do with the development. Because I know for folks listening, a lot of them might not be publishing research, but they're going to be replicating or extending practices. And it's always that fear of, I didn't do it exactly like they did in the research. And it is that nice feeling of, the research didn't do it exactly like it looked at the research.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Yeah. You do. I mean, if you read that dental study, my graduate student did make some errors, right? Mm-hmm. She gave feedback when she wasn't supposed to, or something like that. So, these things happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gives me hope.
Yeah, I don't know, really. And then there was only the one dentist. Actually, that was the question. How did that? There was only one participant who got to do any generalization before that study had happened. Was it just a fluke, and you were able to get it in time for the final paper? Because the shutdown, it wasn't going to be possible for all of them.
So he was slightly different because So like I said, we had this project going with the transition clinic where Lucia was working directly with the patients and then bringing in the dentists to do the generalization probes. And also they were getting people who were rotating through, I don't think they call them residency, like a resident, because that's more medical. But the gentleman who actually was able to work on a patient was different because he was actually already working with patients as part of his own training. And he actually already was a dentist. Okay. So the rest were students who volunteered specifically just to do this research. They weren't really involved in this transition clinic program. Whereas this one guy was actually involved in the transition clinic program. And at the point that he was the last participant in the study, and at that point they started slowly bringing some patients back in.
I see.
So that's how he had an opportunity. But you'll notice there's no baseline probes with a patient because that wasn't, it was just right. The timing was good. That just allowed him to do that. And we figured might as well, right?
I know. Yeah.
You have the opportunity.
Oh boy. So Dorothy, you mentioned a lot of, studies that are already, winding down, and some kind of areas you're looking into specific to BST related to the role plays and how many role plays. I mean, are there any other kind of big ideas that are in the planning stages or in the initial stages kind of related to these lines of research they haven't mentioned?
Like I said, we're going to be testing the package directly with patients, and then we're going to be training these medical students. And so for our first year of the grant, like I said, we have to train 200, right, in 60 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
So we don't think of that. That's probably going to produce any research data. But I think what we need to do is think about how we're going to do that and look at the outcomes. So I think, it could be we could potentially include the data for research if we can get those performance data, rather than just, we're going to test their knowledge before and after,
right,
and that kind of thing. But really just, can they do it? Can they actually do it? So I think going forward, what we want to do is develop a package, a training package, a curriculum that can be easily incorporated into existing medical school curricula. The other piece that I haven't mentioned is, so that's for medical students, but what about currently practicing medical professionals who may want that training? So the other part of the grant is we're going to be developing an online program. So basically what we envision is a website where medical and other healthcare professionals can download video modules, training modules, as much as this, research on self-instructional modalities often shows they aren't completely successful, right? They might be with some people, but not with everyone. So what we're going to do is have as much of that they can do on their own, and then have virtual trainings where they can come do virtual role plays and kind of similar to the ECHO model, if you're familiar with that, and sort of borrowing from that. And so that's something that we're going to be evaluating through, research, looking to see the effectiveness of that as well.
Excellent. That sounds very exciting. I look forward to seeing the results of that. Anything with training and virtual training is a fascinating topic.
And that's always the challenge in our research, is scaling it in such a way. Because your goal is not to need a behavior analyst in every dental office and every hospital. The idea is building these trainings that are built on behavior analytic good practice and technique, so that then it just becomes part of what training everyone receives, right? All medical professionals.
Exactly. It's the scaling up that behavior analysts have not done as well at as maybe some other professionals, but that's because it's hard to do that and use evidence-based effective training, right? And so that's the piece we have to figure out.
Although devil's advocate, Marketing idea for behavior analysts. If we could get every local doctor's office and dentist to hire a behavior analyst to sit in the closet and just sort of open and come out when needed. I mean, come on.
I think an accordion door.
We'd be raking in the dough. Everyone would, I got my behavior analyst. They're over there. Like a Roomba. We're just there. We come out.
That's a good point.
What are we thinking? We're scaling, being more efficient. Oh no, we got to go the other direction. It's really inefficient. Very bespoke behavior analyst behavior. That's what that's what we need for the field. Really, just
There's plenty of work to go around.
Right. Well, there's such a shortage of behavior analysts as it is. Yeah, it's hard to hire. We have a position that we still haven't been able to fill for a BCBA supervising graduate students, which I think a lot of people would like.
Sounds like a sweet job.
Yeah, so I'm just going to put that out there. If there's a behavior analyst listening who's interested in working for the University of Houston Clear Lake, training graduate students.
Well, Dorothy, is there really a lake? That's the question I always have. Like, is there a giant clear lake that the university built around?
So the university is located in what's called the Clear Lake area. And we're in the southeast corner of Houston, real near NASA, like 10 minutes from NASA. And there's a lot of lakes around here, including a lake called Clear Lake. And we're actually very close to the Gulf. You don't realize it cuts in. So we're actually like 15 minutes from the ocean.
Oh, wow.
It's just because it cuts in. Like it's a Gulf and it cuts in.
I did not realize that.
Yeah. Right. Oh, that sounds like a nice perk.
And the lake.
Right? There's a lot of water around here. Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, it sounds like we're about ready to enter into the last segment of the show, our dissemination station. Oh, that was good.
That was the train.
For listeners, you didn't get to see the video, but Jackie was a little behind, so I didn't even know where that sound was coming from because her video was catching up with her audio. It was really, really cool. So, Dr. Lerman, I think we kind of have two summary things I would love to hear. One of them certainly going to be around kind of some good practices related to working with the different professionals. Because I'm guessing a lot of our listeners are not going to wake up tomorrow and be like, oh, I was dreading that meeting with a dentist, and now I know what to do. Most of us probably aren't going to be doing that. But I would like to hear sort of, the big summary pieces from working with these specific professionals. But then more broadly, what this has taught you and what you now feel like I'm going to add this to my curriculum, working with my students on just some good practices for working with other professionals in similar needs.
I think it's very important to spend time with them and get to know more about what they do. So like I mentioned earlier, we had to find out what are the police officers already taught to do? And we've got to make sure that what we're teaching makes sense to them and doesn't conflict with what they're talking about, what they're learning already, and that we use their terminology. I wish I could think of some examples, but I remember that when Carly first put together her presentation, the other trainers gave her feedback on some of her terminology to incorporate police lingo, right? To incorporate police lingo to build that credibility, right, with them. Mm-hmm. And the same went with the dentist. So they had to tell us, how do they do an exam? What order they typically do it in? What are the terms for the different instruments? Mm-hmm. And we really had, what are they already taught to do, right? And so again, I think it's really important to learn as much as you can about what they're already doing, their procedures, their terminology. And if you want to get buy-in, you want to incorporate that. You don't want to be teaching them to do things that will just be very foreign to them. It needs to be compatible and fit right in with what they're already doing, right? So they don't maybe have to, obviously we're all wanting to change some of the things they're doing. But if it's too different, right, then you're not going to get the buy-in.
Well, even just talking about that, Dorothy, I'm thinking about, I work in schools a lot, and we're always talking about classroom management. And I'll sometimes ask students or, teachers who I know are like just starting out, what is their background in classroom management? And they'll talk about I had a class and they did this. And, just hearing you give that recommendation, I went through school for special education, but I don't know what a general education class management curriculum looks like at all. And other than those questions, I've never viewed one. It was just, you just kind of knew how to do it from where I was coming from. And I just assumed they had a bad teacher or they just didn't bother to teach them. But boy, I bet there's some pieces missing that could go a long way with, hey, here's how I'm going to show you some classroom management techniques that would make it, go down a bit easier or just be clearer without making any big changes. Sorry, on their part.
Yeah. And in fact, that's a big thing that we've learned when working with teachers is to incorporate their terminology, right? Mm-hmm. How they call it. So there are things that they do that are very similar to what behavioral analysts do, but they just call them something else. Mm-hmm. So we make sure that we use their language, because that way you are going to get the buy-in and they're going to understand, and it's not going to seem so weird or different to them.
Yeah. Oh,
good
boy.
Advice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So even if you're not going to go see your local law enforcement agency or local dentist tomorrow, folks, you still have a lot that can really be gleaned from both of these articles when you're doing your own trainings and your own practice, especially if we hope to train people other than other behavior analysts and parents, which again, we still want to do that too, but there's more to be done than just those areas. Woo. Well, Dr. Dorothea Lerman, thank you so much for being on the show. We so appreciate getting the chance to talk about this. I love training articles, so I had a ton of fun, and I hope you did as well.
I did. You guys made this so fun.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Yeah. If folks want to reach out and inquire about kind of some of the upcoming research, or hey, maybe they want to come take a visit down to the Houston area to maybe fill the job post, how should they reach out to you?
Yeah, by email. So my email address is Lerman, LERMAN, @uhcl.edu. And can I have permission to plug a book that's coming out?
Of course you can, yeah.
No way.
Actually, I think you are the first guest we've ever had that phrased it as plugging. Like I used to ask people every time, do you have anything to plug? Because that's what I hear on all the other podcasts I listen to, like movie podcasts. And everyone would look at me like, what are you talking about? So I thank you, Dorothy, for finally, after so many episodes.
She's hip to the lingo.
Right. So another research area of mine that's very dear to my heart is teaching individuals with neurodevelopmental disabilities job-related social skills, assessing and intervention. And so I was very, very fortunate to get a book contract with Rutledge, and that will be coming out in early next year, I believe, that's focused on assessing and treating or intervention for job-related social skills.
Oh, that's awesome.
Great.
What's it going to be called?
The title is Neurodevelopmental Disabilities in Employment, Preparing Learners for the Social Demands of the Workplace.
Ooh!
That's a good title.
Great title.
That really hits all the quadrants of information you need to know. I love it.
It's a really needed area because this is a population that is extraordinarily underemployed and could make huge contributions. And they haven't been allowed the opportunities to. So I can't wait to see that come out.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Huge thanks to Dr. Dorothea Lerman for coming on the show and sharing so much of the nitty-gritty, great results, and just fun anecdotes that I think go into the development of creating the research that we love to discuss on this show. So it was very exciting. I hope you all could hear in my voice and all of our voices how much fun it was to talk about training other professionals and specifically these research procedures. I want to thank a few more people, though, including thanking you so much for listening to ABA Inside Track. We'd love it if you subscribe to the show, if you left us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you like to get your podcasts. We would appreciate it if you checked us out. We're on all of the social medias as ABA Inside Track. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of the articles discussed on this episode, as well as to find links to all of our previous episodes and a place to purchase CEs if you are so inclined. And if you want even more ABA Inside Track content, you can subscribe for bonuses on Patreon. That's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where for just $3 a month, you can get all of these episodes a week ahead of time. If you'd like to subscribe at some of the higher levels, for $5 a month, you can get access to our live episode. We've got another one coming up pretty soon on visual supports, which also comes with a free CE. Or you can get access to our super long book club podcast that we do every season. That's at the $10 and up level. We have another one coming out. We just found out the winner as of this recording. We'll be reading Between Now and Dreams by Eli Rosales and Heinkel Wolf. We talked about it actually when we had Dr. Eli Rosales on the show, so very excited to get to read that on the theme of parenting. So if you want to get the full-length version of that and 2 CEs at no additional charge, just join us on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And speaking of CEs, you probably want the second secret code word. It is cognac, COGNAC. Dr. Lerman was saying that it is one of the spirits that is enjoyed in the household there. I myself, I don't know if I've ever had a fancy cognac. It sounds very fancy. I'd love to have one. Perhaps I'll see if I can find one to drink in Dr. Lerman's honor. That's cognac. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of ABA Inside Track. We really appreciate and want to thank Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another full-length episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye!